So this is the crew of Shackleton's Endurance as they head south into the Weddell Sea. They made this famous journey in the hope of trying to be the first to cross the Antarctic continent. They ended up getting caught, and the story of the Endurance became legend. Here you can see Shackleton, the boss, looking pensive, looking worried, looking over the deck into the encroaching pack as the list of the ship continues. 10 months, these guys are under pressure, and then finally the loss of the Endurance. Months they spent on camp until they finally got released from the pack ice. They had the most astounding journey on the 3 small lifeboats. 6 days of hardship and over 80 hours without sleep. They finally made their way up onto the small beach. Here we are on Elephant Island, the men exhausted, tired, frostbitten. One reportedly had a heart attack when they arrived. There was amputations to follow. The men tried to make good as they could on this small, remote island, but Shackleton knew at that point that they needed to go further. They needed to make their own rescue. With the help of his team and the carpenter McNeish, they got in the small lifeboat, the James Caird. Shackleton, Crean, Worsley, and 3 men set off 800 miles of open ocean. Frank Worsley, the captain, could only get 4 sightings on that terrible 16-day journey, and they arrived weather-beaten, exhausted, on the south coast of South Georgia. It's the most epic small boat journey of all time. We wanted to honour the spirit of the 3 original players who made the final crossing of South Georgia. In Shackleton, we had an experienced explorer, and we were delighted to be able to select James Blake, who himself had rowed the Tasman Sea between Australia and New Zealand, came from a famous explorer legacy with his father, the late Sir Peter Blake. For the Irish connection, Tom Crean had served in the British Army, but he was a staunch Irishman. We were delighted to be able to have Sinead Hunt, herself a lieutenant in the Irish Defence Forces, join us. She had a wonderful spirit, the Irish sense of humour, and also was incredibly upbeat, just a wonderful example of that great Irish spirit. The New Zealand connection, Frank Worsley. We were delighted to be able to find Tom McTavish, himself from a small east coast town on the South Island, who, like Worsley, had grown up in fishing boats, playing around off the coast of New Zealand. And Tom had a deep love for marine biology and had an affinity with the natural world, and that was something which we thought reflected incredibly well back on Frank Worsley. We also had 2 mountain guides from New Zealand, one of which had made the crossing before but never on skis, and myself. And I suppose having created, the vision for this expedition and was keen to be part of this, having grown up with the legends of that expedition and the love of South Georgia and the sub-Antarctics, and of course being able to instill those stories and that love of history in our young explorers.
In the past, I guess I'd always tried to tie my alpine adventures and things in with history. So it was something that immediately appealed. And then it was just, I guess, about trying to think of a way to inspire others, which was, I guess, the task that we were assigned and was sort of a big part of the application process.
So when the three men got to South Georgia, they had very limited equipment. They took 3 days' rations that they put in socks so that each man could carry his own food. They decided not to take any sleeping bags. They had a Primus lamp, 48 matches, and a small cooker. They also took screws from the James Caird to put through their boots to get a bit more grip on the ice. Very limited equipment.
Equipment has moved on somewhat from the days of Shackleton, Worsley and Crean. The equipment we'll be using is touring skis, ski touring boots, poles, climbing skins, avalanche equipment, transceiver, collapsible shovel, probe, glacier travel equipment, rope, harness, prussics, carabiners, ice axe, crampons, GPS, down sleeping bag, freeze-dried food, a pack, insulated thermarest, warm gear, storm goggles, and 2 mountain guides, 1 short, 1 tall.
Yeah, excited now. It's hard to believe today is finally here. A little nervous, I guess, but conditions are looking good, and hopefully we'll get into King Haakon Bay later on in a few hours.
So here we are, heading towards the southern coast of South Georgia. This is where the men in the James Caird would have been itching to see land.
We saw a towering black crag with a lacework of snow around its flanks. One glimpse, then it was hidden again. We looked at each other with cheerful, foolish grins.
Well, we've got really calm seas. I know they had a huge storm that nearly sunk the James Caird on their arrival. It's pretty special to be in this part of the world and just about to set off soon to walk in the footsteps of legends.
One of the most memorable parts of it for me was actually just coming into King Haakon Bay on that western side. And we had the sketch map that Worsley had created when they'd gone into King Haakon Bay. And on that map he had drawn the glaciers, and he had drawn the reefs, and he had even drawn like where the little areas were where there was kelp on the surface. So to have that map and to be able to sail into King Haakon Bay and to be able to count the same glaciers that Worsley had counted, and to see the same kelp reefs even, and to weave through the rocks and stuff that they'd weaved through, it was like a window in time. Two of the 6 of them were pretty close to death, so I think they felt there was no choice but to land. They left one person with the 2 that were pretty close to death. I suspect they thought, geez, this is a pretty hostile place. Although probably by that stage, given the hostile places they'd been at, their senses were somewhat dampened to that kind of thing.
Shackleton, Crean and Worsley had to make the trip across the uncharted lands of South Georgia, through the glaciers and the mountains to try and reach safety. They knew there was a whaling station at Stromness. The island had never been crossed before. They had no map. It was late May. They had just endured 17 months of hardship, and the lives of all 28 men of the Endurance were dependent on them safely making it across.
I felt quite isolated when watching the ships sail away. It really sunk in that we were on our own. We were the only people on the island.
Never have I felt so puny nor realised so clearly the helplessness of man against nature.
You're in a situation of self-rescue. You cannot pick up a satellite phone and be rescued in that environment. So you get a little glimpse, I think, of what it was like, but you can't get the full taste, because I think there's just, it's such an incredible achievement and undertaking from those early days.
We were thinking as we were walking along today, I can't imagine what they were thinking at all as they were doing the crossing. It's quite an ominous place, quite eerie, the light and the changing weather conditions.
Worsley's probably turning in his grave going, we didn't sleep bloody nights out. We just walked for 36 hours constantly. This new generation of explorers.
Check it out! So we're now on what's called the Crean Glacier after Tom. You can see up behind me here the slope in which the guys late at night decided to make the biggest call of the trip when they bum slid from the top without knowing what was below them, and their account says they enjoyed the ride down. A really quick way to lose a lot of altitude and gain a bit of safety, but a huge gamble and one that paid off for them.
We've just come down the Fortuna Glacier. The three men stopped here for food after they'd got down. They promptly fell asleep. Shackleton knew that if they didn't wake up, they would die. He woke them up after 2 minutes, saying that they'd been asleep for 30 minutes. We've got it slightly better than they did.
On our second night, we set up around on the beach. So we had a harem of elephant seals about 100 metres away, and we had little groups of king penguins around the tents. You'd sort of be like eating your dinner and things, and they'd be sort of looking over like, you know, what are those things and what's going on? But equally we were looking at them going, well, you know, geez, those things are pretty cool and they're pretty unique and we haven't seen them before.
My toes are pretty cold, to be fair. They're screaming cold. It is a lot colder than the South Island River in New Zealand. And I'm very much looking forward to putting my stinking socks back on my feet. Feel the blood coming back into them now. Oh.
We had a pretty easy meander around the shore, looking at penguins and stuff, and generally enjoying ourselves. And the weather was deteriorating, but I don't think we thought too much of it. And I think one of the mountain guides had even uttered something like, oh, nothing can stop us now.
We were on the home stretch crossing a path that tourists use in the summer. Almost there, and then suddenly we were back into survival mode.
They were the strongest winds that anyone in the group had ever experienced before in the mountains.
We got to a point where the winds were so intense that people were starting to get blown off their feet.
guess, a fine line between success and failure. We put on crampons and we sort of crabbed our way down as best we could off the pass, and the weather, I guess, eased substantially as we came off the pass.
I can't imagine what the three men would have felt. That level of relief times a million. At hearing the bell, knowing that there were still people manning the stations in Stromness.
I think Worsley suggested something to the effect of 3 haggard-looking scarecrows or something like that, and they showed up at the manager of the whaling station's house. And I imagine it was quite an incredible feeling for the manager when they said, "Oh, well, we're Shackleton, Worsley and Crean. We saw you 18 months ago." Yeah, the consensus probably would have been that they'd died and that they would never be seeing them again. You know, they might have had some luck on that expedition, probably incredible luck, actually. But if they hadn't been prepared to just keep going relentlessly, then they would have never had the opportunity to receive that luck. Even insurmountable challenges, you know, well, it's worth having a shot, isn't it? Because you just don't know quite what will happen.